Hello, everyone. Welcome to our world today, Vienna's perspective. Today, we have two main things that we wanted to talk about and discuss a little bit. The first of the two being the US decision to help Ukraine and all different decisions as well on Israel and other things. So I am curious to know what Isaiah and Sage have to say about this because they researched this topic for us today. And yeah, what's going on with the US Senate and what's this decision about?
Yeah, so the decision was largely about in the US, whether or not it was seen as desirable to help other nations, and to kind of give foreign aid and support them in their um, efforts to maintain democracy, basically, or to not do so, like to be more like isolationist or like America first. That's how they phrase it. So, yeah, that was, I guess, what it was about. There were two parts to it. The first part is all the political intrigue and the whole process that was going on, in the US House of Representatives in order for this to be passed, and then the other part of it is, the nations that this would be affecting, so the state of the war in Ukraine, Taiwan situation, also, Israel situation too. So they're kind of like all tied up together. And then another part of this bill, it was like a $95 billion bill, was it has to do with um, seizing some Russian assets that apparently haven't been seized yet, and also um, banning TikTok as well. Is kind of like wrapped up in this whole discussion too. So it's like a big bill, and so that's basically the overview of what was going on there. Yeah.
Yeah. And banning TikTok was like the second part of very important news that we were going to discuss. So first question is I guess the first statement is I guess they chose towards helping Ukraine. And I feel like maybe there is a global choice to act together. We're seeing NATO, people in NATO having more of a coordinated way to use their military forces, uh, at least just a little bit. And I think a lot of people were like, we shouldn't, I don't know, go forward messing with other affairs. But I think there is something that is pretty clear about the fact that if we do not intervene in Ukraine, this could potentially be something of a European scale conflict, if not a world scale conflict. And that's something that all political science professionals that I've heard so far are saying, and I'm guessing that the countries are going towards this decision. So, how do we feel about the US finally deciding on this? Because this was like 7 months in the work, basically. So what's your feeling on that, you guys?
I feel like in terms of how U.S. domestic politics connects to international politics, like we've been talking spiritually about we're talking about the spiritual topic of stability and people in the US wanting to choose stability because there was COVID-19, there was the little recession that happened with that, there was Donald Trump's presidency, which was like really chaotic, and of course not all Americans were opposed to that, or saw that as a bad thing, but many did, and that's why we feel Joe Biden was elected, right, in 2020, because he represents stability, like someone who has been in Washington, D.C. for like decades and who just, wasn't going to be a wild card at all, right? And so I feel like that's kind of connected to this policy of supporting Ukraine and Taiwan and also Israel, because the US has this like whole tradition for most of the 20th century to be like, if democracy's in trouble and if the world order's in trouble, we are there to help. And the idea is, I feel like it goes beyond just feeling like, oh, this is just good for the US, like we're just doing this to kind of gain gain cred and stuff like that, or gain economic advantage, but that it supports the entire world system, basically. And that's like what I feel like what you were talking about, Irene, is everyone knows that Russia will use Ukraine as a launch pad for further European BS that they could conduct. So I feel like it was choosing stability. The other factor too of it was that the Republican Party, not a majority in the House, but like a sizable amount, almost a majority, was behind this bill, and I feel like it represents how they don't want to challenge Mike Johnson's speakership. Like he's the Speaker of the House, and we remember a little while back the old Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, um, was ousted because he worked with Democrats on something. Like there was some bipartisanship going on for some bill to avoid the government shutdown. Right? I think it was last year. And then some Republicans of the more far right faction said we're going to call to have him ousted, and Donald Trump doesn't approve of this. And then he was ousted. And then there were like weeks of kind of like a power vacuum, and then Mike Johnson was appointed, right? And I feel like there is a sense that people were like, you know what, we can support this, we can do this bipartisan deal because we don't feel like it's a serious risk that Mike Johnson is going to be removed, because that would be seen as very bad for the nation. Like it would seem really unstable. The Republican Party would not benefit from that. So I feel like that's kind of what happened on the politics level, and it's kind of a choice, yeah, like a choice of stability. Like they don't want to be like, oh, let's have another upheaval there. So, and that's what I felt from that.
Yeah, I think to kind of tie it in terms of like political views, I feel like a lot of people were kind of scared that we're going to have an Afghanistan again, or Iraq or Iran and things like that, where the US was involved too much. And we kind of have that fear as well in France. But I don't think that's that way at all. Like it feels like a intervention from the West has been very measured, and it's just part of the plan of um, you know, upping the support in a measured way. And it's just about sending ammunitions right now. It's just about sending material, not necessarily intervening. And even if intervening, it's not intervening in a very like overpowering way that would overthrow the leadership of the Ukrainian military. So I feel like it is very different. Like it's very much support, not intervention, right? And and also the I guess the consequences, like the results are going to be different as well. So I just wanted to point that out, I would say, for because I feel like a lot of people are fearing being, I don't know, drafted to go fight in Ukraine, and just saying like what the hell are we doing here? Like let's just focus on our country right now. And I feel like that's not actually the case. But yeah, that's just my feeling in terms of like what I've heard in France from some people. So yeah, I would be curious if that would be the rhetoric of people that were against it in the US or everywhere else. So I'm curious to know like how you guys see this in your countries.
So I think the one thing we must add is that as part of that aid package, that there's also humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. And I think, it's important because we've had this conversation around instability in all its forms for such a long period of time, and the desire for stability. And yes, it might be taking from the US's resources in one way or another. I think the conflicts create even bigger drains on economic resources across the world. And let's also not forget that the fighting in Israel and Gaza and with the Houthis and everything is all on that Red Sea Strait. That's a very important trade route. So there is a requirement to stabilize it a lot more because of the fact that it is such a significant trade route. And then, I mean, just even the Ukraine-Russia war has had a significant impact on gas and power supplies and food supplies across various places in Europe. So all of these things are creating higher levels of instability and probably driving a lot of inflationary pain that no country can really bear in this economy. So there's a lot more at stake than just a nation's wealth. It's almost an international wealth that is at stake, and therefore the countries that are able to engage a little bit better, I think they are just answering the call, and you can see that in the US's decision here. And you'll probably see that in the next topic around some of the cooperative stuff that's happening in the South China Sea. So there's a lot of work being done to shift from that significant level of instability into a much more desirable state of stability, even though it's thinning resources in some instances.
I feel like this feels really good and a mature decision. Like from previous times that the US has given aid or has supported in any way, there has been like some kind of excessive spending. But here it seems like it has been very timely planned. It has been thoroughly looked at where each money and portion is going to go towards. And it feels that, US has that power to ground democracy in many ways. So with that power comes with great responsibility to, take into account of how they can give their allyship and give their partnership. And so it really feels good how they allocated the money and how they're going about this. Um,
Yeah, and I just want to mention also that on the other side of the globe, Japan has joined the maritime alliance between the US, the UK, and Australia to protect the Sea of China. So I feel like this is not just the US, and I feel like spiritually and geopolitically, it's just showing that basically what we choose as a whole is a world of more partnerships. And so in a world of more partnerships and union and harmony, we're just going to help each other. And I think maybe that's the response. And I think maybe this is scary for other people because we're not used to doing that on that scale. Or maybe for people it feels like if we're doing that on that scale, um it must be because it's announcing like World War III. I'm not sure this is the case. I feel like this is just like a new way of relating to each other, and I feel like we just need to adapt to it because it's just going to bring hopefully more benefits. Like imagine instead of having like one military force scattered everywhere, you have several military forces that actually know what the others are doing and act as one in order to like just bring stability everywhere. So if this is not a choice of instability, it's actually a choice of stability, I would say.
It feels like a lot of mature communication within world leaders that is going on, and a shift that is happening with how people are planning. Because you could say something differently, and Palestine or Russia could take it completely wrong. Like if we were in Trump era right now, maybe communication would not be as stable or as grounded. And the way that we allocate this money could be taken very differently. But now how it's being transferred feels very mature, and communication seems to be clearing up as well.
So I like that you see the positive frame to it, but I also want to bring in the fact that there's a great level of increased cooperation, but it's not necessarily all for altruistic reasons, right? So people are still securing their own positions, and it makes sense for them to do that because of the fact that there is such a strain in the world at the moment from a warring point of view, from a conflict point of view. There is a requirement to have somebody in your corner, somebody as powerful as the US in your corner. But you know, there's a principle in accounting that says there's no such thing as a free lunch. So there's always going to be some level of trade-off, some level of giving ground. And again, I'm not faulting any effort. I'm just saying we mustn't just see it as an altruistic motive, because I don't believe that it's fully altruistic.
No, I don't think as we live in a world where everything is given for free, anything is given for free. I think we're very much in relationships where everyone has to have gains in them. But I feel like we're coming to the realization that having an agenda is not necessarily a bad thing. Like for example, in relationships, like we learn here to have healthy relationships. And in these healthy relationships, you give something because you love someone, but you have something in return as well. That is also something that makes you feel good because this is a two-way street. And that's exactly the same for countries. And that doesn't mean that it, removes any of the goodwill of like helping your partner. It's just that we're just realizing that, hey, like anyone wants to have gains from these relationships as well. And it's not necessarily like that we're money hungry or, that we're just like power hungry or like oil hungry like we used to be a few decades ago. But yeah, it just, but we
It
could very well be as well. That's a possibility. It's just, how this works.
feels like an investment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I I know what you're saying though, Granville, with that, and kind of like yeah, because like this foreign aid, it represents the US trying to uphold the global order as it is now, kind of, and like Taiwan is like super important to the world economy, like producing all those like semiconductors and a lot of other things. Like Taiwan is super economically intertwined with everyone, including China, which almost makes it sound absurd that China would even consider threatening Taiwan, but it's part of their like domestic power game, I feel. But and then like yeah, so like in supporting Europe's like peacefulness by defending Ukraine, yeah, it kind of upholds the international system that's like supported by the US, and it does benefit all of those who are involved with it. And part of the grievance of some nations is that they feel like they're not as benefited by it, but it's mainly because like they're not really willing to play by the same rules and like respecting like democratic principles and rule of law and like um giving instead of taking, basically. Like Russia, their war in Ukraine represents the old mentality of like pillage and take from others. China, is basically having that same attitude with Taiwan. They've had that attitude for a long time with intellectual property, that they can basically just take anything that they want, more or less. And that might be part of why, too, this whole TikTok ban thing is like kind of moving along, just because of general upset toward China about that. Even if TikTok may not be the worst thing, or the most threatening thing. I don't even know though. But I just feel like that's what it's about. But I feel like this international system, while not perfect, like the order of how things are, it's a whole lot better than the chaos that would ensue, I feel, if Russia and China and everyone who wants the medieval style of doing things, if they were to prevail. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Because yeah, it just seems
Yeah.
better. So
So, yeah, for sure. So let's take that opportunity to maybe address the TikTok ban. And maybe like spend, if you guys agree, like 10 minutes, maybe a little bit less, talking about it. So the TikTok ban,
So,
as
Yoreen, can I just add something about our previous topic that Nadia touched on that I think we must also not lose sight of? When you say it feels like an investment, by investment standards, we would expect some type of return. And so we need to be clear that the investment has to yield some type of positive result for it to have been lucrative. So that's just a little caveat to add in there.
Mhm. Yeah. I think we're in an advantage right now to even give this type of aid. If it was the other way around where Ukraine was attacking Russia, then it will be another story. But we're at this advantage where we can aid and have things positioned very well that we could have a return on investment, even if it's just a partnership or a type of allyship between countries.
yeah, I think Ukraine definitely does start to give that by being an ally to NATO, and definitely like they've increased their partnership power in the past 2 years for a lot. Like they've increased their way of like communicating and relationships. And I think that's not something to be underestimated. So that's what they give for now, I would say. But you know, about that TikTok ban, so this hasn't happened yet. We have from April the 20th, 420, we have 6 months to, well, I would say we, but TikTok has 6 months to move their principal, I guess, investors, supporters, producers to an American company instead of having them in China. So the CEO of TikTok had said in his hearing that he was in the process of doing that already. But the Senate has given a deadline towards doing that. And by giving a deadline towards doing that of 6 months, I think in the mind of most people, they just kind of it's as if they would have already banned TikTok. So that's a very, I would say, peculiar situation, and I don't know how to feel about that. I would say that even more in the US, I seem to understand that in the US, TikTok has a very, very, very high merchant value because you have ads like every 2, 3 videos, which is something that we don't necessarily we do have in Europe, but less, you know. So TikTok has kind of replaced the former use of television in some ways, in the way that it is used, and that is an extraordinary financial power, at least for the US. So I'm wondering how this will impact everybody. And also, this was like an app of like, this is an app of sharing. This is an app of people being, aside from merchant value, it's an app of people being very, very direct, I would say, very raw sometimes. So yeah, I don't know. I would just like to hear you guys, maybe American people, citizens, how do you feel about this bill and the changes coming? And do you have any use of TikTok at the moment and how this would change your daily usage as well?
Knowing that the owner of TikTok was already in the process of moving and shifting things to the US, now I don't feel so like bad that US is giving such a pressure to make sure that these are going forward. And I feel like 6 months is a good amount of time to be like, you said you're going to go forward with this, you have 6 months to go forward with it. Um, of course, it is his own company, and he should be allowed to do whatever he wants to do with it. And if US doesn't want to be a part of it, then they don't have to, because US is also benefiting from TikTok being here. So we have to recognize that too. But I'm not quite sure why we want the owner to shift to the US. What was the reasoning for that?
So that's shifting to the US, like him being in the process of doing that, that's what he said. We don't know for sure. But there is definitely a plan for that, right? Even though it wasn't in the works yet. The hearing that he had in Parliament a few months ago, like last year, I think last year, yeah, was pretty much like Facebook, but with a very political side of basically like, is China using the data of users, basically? And what are they doing with it, and how are they using it, and things like that. And they ask questions from the littlest, the smallest, you know, social media use of like, do they have access to the camera? Like, does to very like for questioning like does the filter register the face of people to file it somewhere? And that's where the CEO kind of promised to, it was like, yeah, it's already in the works. Like we're transferring to America. And I feel like this is okay because like this is the game. Like you kind of have to abide by the rules of the people that make the rules in order to kind of survive. Otherwise, like you wouldn't survive. Facebook has done that many a time. But then like a transfer in 6 months in terms of companies, depending on the companies and depending on the country, it may be short, especially with a controlling country like China, if we say so. But that's a lot of maybes, but that's just, now you have context, a little bit more context. Yeah. So yeah, Isaiah and Sage, like what was your take on this?
I feel like, yeah, I was talking about it earlier, with Isaiah, and I've always been saying, like, I feel like this is a bunch of baloney. I've been saying that, like, because in the U.S. House or Senate hearings and all of that, they were really concerned about, like, can the Chinese government get access to people's personal data, through the TikTok app. And because in China, the barrier between the government and private enterprise, I would have put that in quotes, private enterprise in China, that boundary is so, like, thin or like non-existent or whatever. You can pretty much bet that the Chinese government could get access to anything that they wanted with no barriers, right? So I think that's accurate to say. And the whole time I've been like, this is such BS. Cause, like, come on, like, what's the Chinese government gonna do with, like, an image of, like, our faces? Or, like, they're like, those Americans are really into cat videos. Maybe we should target our Chinese propaganda at them using cats, right? Cats will propagandize the Communist Party, right? And I was just like, this is so ridiculous. But then as I was feeling into it, I was like, maybe I'm just kind of numbed out here, and maybe it does feel bad if there really were that threat. And the thing about it too is that I don't have information on this. Like, I'm not an expert in that area. I don't know what the real risks would be. I think a lot of people would just make an assumption not knowing anything. So they would either be on that's they would either think, oh, who cares if Chinese government sees that I love cat videos? I don't care. Or they would be on the other end who are like, you know, I don't want some communist dictatorship having access to my personal data, because it's something that a lot of people, I've heard in the US are like, oh, there's no privacy anymore. They have access to my data, and they're worried and concerned about it, even if they have there's no, like, rational reason for that if you don't have no proof.
It does. It also feels like stability to me, though,
Yeah.
too. Like the kind of healing and the feeling of this talk, because I definitely would feel better with it being handed over to America, I guess. Because it does feel like I don't know. It just feels more stable, and there are some issues with the app that would probably resolve, I feel, if it was able to be transferred over. Um, and yeah, I think it is better, not to, I don't know, have your personal information, no matter how small, like, be leaked, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, well, while you were talking, Sage, I just had this thought, if they're saying that the images are being stored and those kind of things, and we start to put together the nuances of various topics over the last however many weeks, what if those saved images are then starting to be used to train AI? What are the ramifications of those kind of things happening? So, I mean, because let's be honest, what will happen is AI will be trained on facial recognition, but it will be trained to such an extent there's technically almost no nation in the world that doesn't have some level of interaction with TikTok. Then you have a big fight around advancing semiconductor production, which goes into propelling the use and production of AI and that kind of advanced technology in military weaponry and all of those kind of things. So the ramifications and the potential long game that we will not be exposed to could have all of those elements at play in various forms. I don't support the strong arm tactics of forcing a company to move their operational jurisdiction and all sorts of other things. I don't support that, but I also do support safeguarding humanity from the misuse of technology, because we don't know what we don't know, and sometimes once you find out what you didn't know, it's often too late to backtrack or unwind those kind of things. So there is definitely a call for greater vigilance, but there also needs to be a call for justice and balance, and not applying these type of strong arming tactics. You might then have said, oh well, if that's the case, we would like you to open up ownership to more, so rights issues and all of those kind of things, so that these companies start to be controlled by more, almost a greater diversely balanced board and shareholdership and all of those kind of things, because that diversity is going to create the debate. It's probably going to safeguard against a closed system that you don't have access to that information.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. There are, like everything, when there's such an extreme decision, there are benefits and disadvantages. Obviously, like we don't say that the government just wants to ban it because it's bad and teens are using it in a bad way. Like obviously, like there is a side of being concerned, generally concerned about their citizens and safety in a general way. It's just bad. Doing it like that just screams like a little bit of control and like some powerlessness to those things. But I feel like this can be easily overcome by a lot more structure, I guess, boundaries and requirements to creating such a powerful way, tool, communication app, social media in the first place. And that's something that we are going to have to just learn to do, because we cannot go on trying to always have the same discussions about like banning AI and banning this company and banning this company. No, you say your requirements, you say your boundaries, and then that's done. And if someone doesn't respect the boundaries, well, no, you know? But a learning curve, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate what Granville was saying and what you were saying, Yureen, because the way I feel is information is currency. So we do have this advantage that we have a lot of information that China has coming from us. And that is a sort of currency from us that we need to put boundaries on and we need to safeguard. So it really doesn't feel that bad for me, the 6 months, knowing that the process already started. But I can definitely understand strong holding someone, and that should completely not be like allowed. But in a sense of putting it into a time sensitivity, I can understand.
Earlier too, like Nadia, when you were talking about the transfer of ownership with TikTok, I was thinking like, well, maybe beyond like just the human interactions here in the countries, maybe on the level of like the divine, in terms of like what serves humanity best, like what serves love best, like maybe all of this is kind of shaking out in that direction of like serving humanity and serving love better. But of course, like I have no idea whether or not, but it was just an idea that came to me because I know that sometimes things happen where in order for something to advance, um, things have to kind of like shift, and someone else has to like take the reins of something. Like that happened with McDonald's, like Jeff and Shaleia, I think in Life Purpose class, share that about McDonald's, how the original brothers who I think came up with the idea of McDonald's were kind of like they were stagnating it. They were like unwilling to like have a broader vision for McDonald's, and and then Ray Kroc, the guy who made McDonald's what it is today, the huge international mega chain, he kind of like he did kind of like muscle his way in, and he's like, I'm taking the reins now, and because of that the world got McDonald's. And I'm not saying that McDonald's is like perfect or the best thing in the world, but it's just an example of when sometimes something happens and it might look a little rough, but ultimately it's for the best because it proliferates an idea that serves humanity in some way. So I don't know. Maybe that's what's happening, but we're gonna have to see because there's no way of knowing right now. So
And I love how US recognizes its power, but if it does so with integrity, that's the best way, of course. What you were saying of like, what's the best with God? Then, yeah, if it's with integrity, then of course.
Yeah. All of these are things that cross my mind as well, but I just said we will have to see, and I feel that that's all the time that we have today to discuss that, but we'll definitely continue to do that later on. But yeah, thank you to everyone who has watched us, and if you enjoy these discussions, don't forget to like, subscribe, share a comment so that we can continue to do this, and definitely like offer some topics that you would like us to I guess talk about. Yeah, so have a good day and see you next week. Bye bye.